I enjoy the Total War series. Starting with Rome, Medieval 2 and Empire, I got used to the historical quotes during the loading screens. The wit and wisdom of ancient generals, philosophers, politicians and poets diverted the attention away from the loading bar's long march from the left of the screen to the right, and enhanced the gravitas of an already impressive game. The words of wisdom from these Western settings, even from the ancient past, were easy enough to grasp. But for one not initiated in Eastern philosophy, the quotes which came with Shogun 2 cut sharply against familiar wisdom. In Shogun 2, the halberd-wielding unit, the Naginata samurai, was significantly better than their spear-wielding Yari samurai counterparts. The Yari samurai could move faster and fight off cavalry better, but the Naginata samurai had the best armor in the game, performed better in infantry-on-infantry combat, and could defeat cavalry easily enough, and you could still attack. If you can't be offensive with the Naginata, you don't have much imagination. So what is the deal with this quote? Let us get the pedanticism out of the way first. The expanded quote is, the halberd is inferior to the spear on the battlefield. With a spear you can take the initiative, the halberd is defensive. In the hands of one of two men of equal ability, the spear gives a little extra strength. Spear and halberd both have their uses, but neither is very beneficial in confined spaces. They cannot be used for taking a prisoner, they are essentially weapons for the field. This quote is from the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, written around 1645. Now for some terminology. A halberd is an axe-spear combination. The naginata is in Western terms a glaive, not halberd, which is a curved blade on a staff. Ancient and medieval Japan had a variety of polearms, so halberds were not unknown to the island. Halberds have existed since the Bronze Age, perhaps even the Stone Age, and various halberds and other polearms were in use in the East, China specifically, at least 2,000 years before this quote was made. This quote, from the Book of Five Rings, most likely refers to a naginata. It is referred to as a halberd in the English translation. This is probably because a halberd is more well known to the Europeans than a glaive is. However, the naginata was far more commonly depicted than halberds in Japanese art. This is all to say that the Swiss army knife on a stick has been around for a while, and wouldn't have been unknown to Musashi. However, I think this quote applies equally well to halberds and glaives, because what they both have is versatility. Like the Naginata samurai, they are good in most circumstances. They have the length to deal with cavalry, but the long blade can deal with infantry as well. Combined with the heaviest armor, they can withstand arrow fire better. The thrust of the Yari spear is better for piercing armor, though this didn't factor into the game. Against poorly armored opponents, the thrust of the curved Naginata blade is sufficient, but the off-center point will not as effectively transfer force into a thrust. This is what Musashi meant when stating that the spear has a little extra strength. The popularity of the spear eclipsed the naginata as the quality of armor improved. The Yari, inversely, does have the capacity to hew and cut, though is inferior to the naginata in this regard. And the European halberd, with axe blade, fluke and spike, would be better against armor than the spear. The dismounted knight with poleaxe, or English billman, would be analogous to the naginata samurai from the game. A good pick for nearly every circumstance. You don't need to plan and know what your enemy is bringing to counter it appropriately. You'll lose matchups heavy in katanas, nodachi, and matchlocks. But on the battlefield, that is a rare choice. So you'll win enough times that your versatile lack of preparation becomes an economically efficient choice. And that is the trap. Being prepared for anything means you don't have a strategy. You're waiting to react to your opponent. You are prepared to defend. So you need the heavy armor, so you can survive being struck first. The mindset of versatility is a mindset of defense, so you plant your feet and swing your blade around to ward off attacks. If you are specialized, as in the spear, you must take the initiative, and your mindset will be to take the initiative. You will come up with a plan, and you must take the time to understand yourself and your opponent. You will find your opportunity, and you can pierce through a gap when it presents itself. With lighter armor, you can move swiftly. The spear is less complicated, thus less expensive. It is simpler to attack with, you are not overwhelmed with choice, thus you must be decisive. Many of the great empires of the world, the great conquerors, would employ the piercing attack. The Macedonian sarissa and javelin, the Roman pilum and gladius, the Mongol arrow and lance, the Napoleonic shot and bayonet, dense formations, the ability to concentrate force, push through. The pike is especially poorly depicted in Total War games. Pike units only operate effectively stationary, losing cohesion, attack power if they move. An advancing pike block would be an impenetrable wall, which few can overcome and few can withstand. The spear is awfully depicted in many games. For a game spear to pose a threat, one must push a button at the right moment. Made worse in Mount and Blade games, where not moving forward or slightly moving backwards entirely nullifies the damage done by a thrust. A spear should pose a threat simply by being pointed in the direction of the enemy. Something like the couch mechanic Cavalry Receive, where you can simply run at the enemy and the onus is on the receiver to block, dodge, or be skewered. Or if you insist on manual control, make holding down the attack button cause a braced, couched, offensive mode to be activated. Now the flip side of the argument. It could be stated that when you go into a situation where you cannot possibly know your opponent or the circumstances of battle, being versatile and adaptable is crucial. There exist people who are naturally adaptable. These people thrive in ambiguous circumstances. However, early success leads to an over-reliance on the tools that got you there. Thus, you will be at the mercy of those who specialize when the situation stabilizes. The spear, with its primary attack, works well in tight formations, like the specialists work well with others. The halberd is best used with enough space to swing, keeping others at a distance, including those supporting you. If it is used in a tight formation, it cannot reach its full potential, being left with a substandard thrust, though the spear is at a disadvantage without others to cover your flanks. Use of the naginata was common in Japan prior to the Mongol invasions under Kublai Khan. The shock of the outside world encroaching on the Japanese spurred greater cooperation and tighter battle formations. This eventually led to greater use of the yari, and the naginata falling out of favour. Similarly, in ancient China, the use of chariots and dagger-axe halberds before the Qin dynasty of the 3rd century BCE waned as the influence of the Xiongnu Huns rose on the northern border. The chariot and infantry formations of the early Chinese armies were ill-designed for pursuing the nomadic cavalry on the steppe. The chariots required open plains and couldn't pursue among crags and rocks, whereas infantry was too slow. Thus the Han engaged in a 200-year war with their steppe adversaries, adopting cavalry in large quantities to turn the tide. Charioteers often used halberds, but the cavalry needed long spears, and the use of cavalry became normalized in Chinese warfare. The infantry, as a result, needed longer spears to counter the lancing horsemen. As polearms get longer, the weight of the head becomes an increasing burden in terms of counterweight, and the swing of such a long polearm becomes impractical even outside of a dense formation. Thus the shift from halberds to spears seems driven by an external threat to the community, and goes hand in hand with closer cooperation, and hence a collectivist mindset. The mainstream introduction of Confucianism was a response to Xiongnu ingression. The halberd is a weapon for and of isolation, requiring space to reach its full potential, indicating personal glory, self-reliance, and distrust of one's fellows. Its use marks periods of internal conflict amongst a culture, rather than having to deal with an external threat. The quote which appears in the game is from the Victor Harris translation of 1974. Alternatively, we have the Alexander Bennett translation of 2020, which has some slight differences, the main of which being that they use the Japanese words for the Japanese weapons. But I will draw your attention to the Thomas Cleary translation of 1988. The key change here is that the spear is referred to as the vanguard, and the halberd the rear guard. This could mean on the battlefield, the vanguard is the troop formation that is deployed first, head of the line of formation, the people who attack first, whereas the rear guard occupy the back line. They come in as reserves and they hold off the enemy during a retreat. The vanguard executes upon a pre-prepared plan, whereas the rear guard needs to be prepared for contingencies. The original Musashi manuscript is no longer available. Copies are held in private collections, and it is remarkably difficult to Google a free copy of Go Rin no Sho in the original hiragana and kanji. In lieu of that, a reverse translation of the words vanguard and rearguard yielded a great many synonyms. In kanji, there are many words that can mean either term, with associated nuance as goes kanji. Yari, the word for spear, or lance, is associated with vanguard, zen-a, most literally before guardian, or advanced guardian. Whereas santan, sharing the definition of vanguard, also can refer to the pointed end of an object, and axiomatically a spearhead. The naginata associated with rearguard and its associated synonyms. From this I took the word ko-a, ko meaning rear, and the shared a meaning guardian. However, there is a similar sounding word ko-a without the macron over the o, which means lonely or orphan, and figure or silhouette. Perhaps this is a stretch, as both ko-as are articulated by completely different symbols, thus there would be no confusion in a written text, and without knowing the exact symbol used to describe the naginata's quality, this may not be what Musashi meant. However, ko-a, if spoken, as Musashi might have done with his disciples in real life, the two terms, or rearguard and lonely figure, could have been conflated. Though given that the Harris and Bennett translations use the word initiative to refer to the vanguard, it's most likely the word they're using is sente. In conclusion, I present to you that the halberd, glaive, and other hewing polearms bear the curse of any jack of all trades, leaving no room for assistance, rejecting compatibility. I invoked the image of Guan Yu earlier, a famed hero of the Three Kingdoms period in China, famed for the use of the glaive, a progenitor of the naginata. Very much an archetypal glavesman or halberdier, introverted, self-reliant, diverse in capabilities, but ultimately reactionary, over-prideful, and ends up dying surrounded by foes. His spear-wielding brother, Zhong Fei, is conversely a gregarious brute, pro-social and provocative, quick to invite others to carouse and cooperate, also a drunkard, quick to anger. He beats others for often minor offences. It is no surprise that he ends up getting murdered by his own fearful soldiers in his sleep. The halberd is a tool of internal warfare within a culture, used by guards and bodyguards who must react to a potential unknown attack by anyone, anywhere, at any time. The halberd's versatility as said tool serves well in many circumstances, though it is a luxury which falls out of favour when the external world encroaches upon your isolation. The blade itself incites to violence, as spake Homer in the Odyssey. As much as the wielder chooses their weapon, the weapon itself impresses a mindset onto the user. The halberd can be used in an offensive manner if the warrior has done deep self-work, but getting all of your troops a philosophy degree comes at a steep price. One can invest time and training for use of a weapon against its nature, or the way as Musashi would put it, but one would be better off using the appropriate tool for the appropriate job.